Welcome to Still Growing in Grace, a program dedicated to inspiring joy, giving hope, and delighting in grace. I'm Mike Zenker, and I'll be sharing with you a message of hope that will expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. God already deeply loves you, totally accepts you, and really, really likes you. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, your community church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Still Growing in Grace on this early Wednesday morning in November. Don't know what part of the world you're living in, but we had snow flurries yesterday. I drove through a almost ice pellet snowstorm. Didn't leave any accumulation on the ground, but it's like, oh, dang, I was hoping for this to wait even longer. But friends of mine up north had lots more, and I'm certain my friend Rudy in Alberta has already had snow and stuff, but he's fully prepared with his awesome renovation work that he's been doing. So this morning, part 2 of a discussion. If you did not see part 1 or listen to part 1, please click the link below. There's a spot there. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll have to click on a different link and just look for part 1, but it's there. To me, this is a really, really important conversation. You'll see why. If you watched last week, you're going to go, okay, this is good. And I think today it's even deeper. So I'm going to be listening with you. Hope everyone's doing well. Comment if you're watching. Let us know where you're watching from. And let's dive right into this discussion of the pendulum swings of grace. And I'll come back and wrap this up at the end. And I got a great quote to share with you that I got from somebody in my church on Sunday. So let's not wait any further. Here we go. Enjoy this conversation. I'm watching with you. All right. Last time we had a very candid, like you joked around, we're always candid, conversation about stuff that we're seeing and observing around us, especially as spiritual formation shifts in people's lives. I had a small group that I met with this morning, and one of the things we were talking about was COVID has actually become a gift to the church in some ways, the real church. It's attacked the system of church in a brilliant way, aka people now know the church has been lying, that it's actually fun to stay home on a Sunday morning. My wife is part of that. We've served as in pastoral leadership roles for our entire lives, and to then have to not go, it's been refreshing. Almost peaceful, almost godlike, And so that makes us question, what is the purpose of the church? What about doctrines? What holds us together? Is it our relationships? Is it our pet doctrines? And now we enter this deconstruction stuff too, because we're realizing, hang on, what we've been sold in the system of churchianity, some of the key doctrines, they're incomplete or flat out wrong. And where's the safe place to have those conversations, which is what most of our conversations here are.
Yeah, which is hard because in my experience, Richard and I both live in Georgia, which is in the Bible Belt, right? To a large degree, any structured church, I shouldn't say any and every, but the vast majority of structured churches, these conversations aren't easy to have transparently. It's not easy to ask those questions. And so you're absolutely right. We come out of that, but then we long for the sense of community, and where do we find that? And I'll be honest, the true church, the body of Christ, of believers that believe in this, that exists inside of the structured church, but it exists outside of that too. So I think just for the sake of conversation, I know Richard has the church visible and the church invisible that you've used, Richard, as your kind of words. I love that before. So when we're talking, we may want to have some clarity when we're talking about which church, but there is the institution, and the institution, I think you're right, is on notice right now. And but I still, my standpoint, I still wish or long for, somewhere deep down inside me, some loosely structured place or grouping or thing where we can still have that community. And I struggle with that. I don't think I have that in my life right now the way I would love to have it, because not necessarily fear, but for the awareness of what it can become very quickly if you allow it to become religious, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, well, I've seen that there's been more and more division because not only politics, because since the pandemic started, you had an election down the States, which was toxic. We had an election in Canada.
We had an election?
What?
We had an election.
and then you have the religious world is now ramping up their intensity because nobody's listening to them anymore. So now they have a new bandwagon to make themselves feel like they're needed and people need to come to them. Everybody wants the edge of truth. They want to be the ones who know more than the others. And I think I've noticed that in the pandemic more than ever. When it comes to vaccine information, who's more right? And then you push. Now I'm contemplating, why are we pushing our stance? Because we feel a need to be heard and be right and to be in the know. It's like the us versus them that the church has fully set up. You
just said in the know, so you said knowledge, and then you said right, which is of good and evil. Right?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I mean, literally, our churches are living at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Our politics are living at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what, we're not the only ones. I'm not the only one who's seen this. I had lunch with a guy yesterday, really good lunch. I won't get into it right now, but a person who has, is questioning the system of church now and wants Jesus, and he's been a Jesus lover his entire life, but the system has really tainted things. And so to step away from church attendance, the requirements, it's been hard on his family, but for him, he's waking up. And then COVID hit. So he had stopped going before COVID, and then COVID forced everybody to stop. So I think there's a time of reckoning for everyone right now. And so some voices are screaming louder and louder, and they're becoming painful in my ear. Friends of ours, the mutual friends who are, championing their bent and their hobby horse, their topic, and just getting louder and more vicious so they're heard. But to me, that's not Jesus. I'm finding a need to be quieter and listen. Relationships are becoming more important now than ever to the system. Are you guys seeing any of this stuff? What's going on in your world? This is my Canadian lens.
Well, I think that's excellent, Mike. I think that's what it's all about, is moving Jesus from the external into the internal and into the today, here, and now. Those are the three terms I always like to use: today, here, and now. Jesus is today, here, and now. And there's always powers out there that try to keep us from walking in the newness and the nowness of God. And I think that, well, it's not, we're on tape delay. I don't know if y'all ever feel this way, but I feel like I'm a lot of times I'll hear Jesus for what happened earlier in the day, but I didn't hear it at the time. And I feel like I'm perpetually playing catch up. And I said, man, I wish I'd heard that then. Or, oh, if I'd only heard that then. Or, oh, if I'd been clear. And I'm not beating myself up at all. I'm just saying that there's so many distractions. And I think Jesus talked about those in, Mark 4 with the soils, about how the cares of the world come in and choke the Christ life out of us, the logos out of us. And it tries to keep it suppressed and underneath. And one of the big ones is institutional church. I mean, using mindless activity that doesn't take any faith or doesn't take any devotion. Not really. You can do it without it.
You're not attacking the church. I'm not hearing that. You are calling out something that's being revealed that is not part of the true life of Christ Church.
Right. And Bill said this earlier, but the reformers used the term the church invisible versus the church visible, using those terms. And the idea being that the church invisible is the actual body of Christ that he can only perceive from heaven. He looks through us, at us, from us, all upside, from every angle. He knows where his body of believers, of active believers, and I believe everyone's going to be a believer at some point, but let's be honest, not everyone's a believer now. There are those who are led by the Spirit.
Then I saw her face.
Right. Yeah, those who are led by the...
I'm a believer. Sorry.
Well, those who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God, Romans 8:14. That's one of my favorite passages. There is a leading, and his body has been, or his bride. It might be better to say that it's more of his bride body, really, because in a way, he's not asleep and he's not sluggish and he's not distracted, but his bride, it's like we're waiting for our husband God to really take us on our honeymoon and take us out and show us everything that we need to know. But as opposed to the church visible being the institutional church, which is where, basically that's the people who profess to be Christians. And how that borderline goes, the church visible, it doesn't take faith. It doesn't take anything to be part of that church. It just takes naming it and claiming, to be Christian and having a building and that sort of thing. Institutional Christianity as opposed to spiritual Christianity. Now, having said that, I agree. I agree with Bill that there are places within the institutional church where there are pockets of the invisible church. But our error comes when we say that the visible church is the invisible church. They're one and the same. And I'm just telling you, they're not. We know they're not. And that's why people leave the church, because it's not giving them the joy of the Lord. They know there's more in them, and some people may leave because they're bitter and for other reasons than that. That's not the only reason people leave church. But I'm telling you, one major one is because they don't feel the presence of God there. And they don't feel the pleasure of God there, and they don't feel the peace of God there. The way when we sit here and we interact like this, there's two or three. We're having church right now. We are the church, but we're having church, because we're comfortable around each other. We feel the peace of God, over our words. And that's what we all hunger for. What is it? A city not made with hands? And yet what is institutional Christianity? It is a city made with hands.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think the best thing that an institutional church can do is the least it can do. I don't know if that makes sense, but the best it can do is the least it can do. That's to stay as neutral and out of the way as it can. Because something about institutionality, it's like a cancer. It spreads, kudzu. It wants to overrun everything and then cover it. Whereas the institutions that are the most effective are the ones that give the most elbow room for people to meet, to come together, to fellowship, and stay out of the way, and not have all of these meticulous, planned out, controlled meetings and activities, which having the appearance of righteousness, but can leave us, as empty graves on the inside, whitened sepulchers, as Jesus said. So that's the basic distinction between the two. It's really the spiritual church versus the carnal church, really, and that's what. Because we know that Jesus' followers would never go kill anybody or hunt or torture heretics the way Augustine suggested, or commit, support holocausts and against Jews and things like that. We know that wasn't Jesus doing the talking, but that was the hive mind of the institution that does the talking. So anyhow, but I've said enough. That's the basic point.
That's okay. This is embarrassing, but it seems like our community clubs are far more like Christ than the churches are. Because community clubs like Lions Club, Rotary Club, things like that, they are authentically community minded. I've met some really good people that are not believers, but they're looking like Jesus a whole lot more than some of my church folk friends. And it's kind of embarrassing. It makes you question, well, then what are we here for? Like, I've been talking about my own church here in Elmira. I'd like to see us become more of a group of chaplains. Each one has their gift of ministry wherever they're at. I got my places I'm good at. I'll serve and love people my way. You go do your way. Let's not create programs. We don't need an evangelism program. That's ridiculous. Be Christ. And
yes.
That is evangelism. So,
amen.
That's the stuff I'm questioning and seeing. So I'm not alone.
No,
you're not.
No, you're not. Yeah, you're not alone in any way, shape, or form. And I think it is good for other people to be able to hear that they're not alone in this too.
Yeah.
I was deeply invested and involved at basically the highest levels of the church for well over a decade and 12 years. and on staff full time for 2. So I've, and I grew up inside of the church at Visible, the institutional church, with my dad being on staff at churches. And honestly, his career was built around facilitating churches. And so when you see that happen in your life, and I'm not the oldest guy on the Zoom call, but for 4 decades of my life, I've gone through kind of shifts of seeing that same thing that you were talking about, Richard, where there's this a buzz of activities. There's a lot of motion.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of do. There's a lot of do, but there's not much be at all, like you just said, Mike. There's not a lot of people who have recognized their place in Christ. One of the things I wrote this week, and that just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. I see it with several organizations, church organizations in our area, where baptisms have become this just odd thing. And baptism, to me, I still hold it as one of the most beautiful sacraments. There's something about the action of baptism that's it still gives me goosebumps to think about, like the idea of being immersed and coming out, and the symbolism behind that. Jesus himself participated in it. That's when, the Father looked down on the Son, and this is my Son whom I'm well pleased. And I had the blessed opportunity to baptize my son. I don't know when he was like 6 or 8. I think he was a little older than that, 8 or 10. And those were the words I said, "This is my Son whom I'm well pleased." Because I'm dying, I'm like bawling, I'm crying and stuff. And baptism has become this thing in these little areas where I'm at least, maybe beyond that, where it's really about how many can we get a week. And look at us, we've baptized 30 people. And yeah, people have gotten saved, and now they're not going to hell. And next week we're going to baptize 20 more. And my thought always goes back to, but what about the 30 you just did? What about the 30 before that? What about the 10 before that? What about the 4 before that? Is there maturity happening? Is there
not call us to be converts? Right.
It's baptizing people in the name of the Father and Son and the Spirit. And then we've missed the whole point of the Great Commission. We missed it. We missed the mark of when Jesus is saying, listen, go to the nations, go outside of Jerusalem, and immerse the world. Can it
be possible that they're doing all these things, the stuff of old, the stuff we have, when we went to church, we learned to do that. These are things you do in church. What if they're so busy trying to ramp up those to-do things because they don't understand the true gospel yet? Exactly.
Well, and even then, baptism doesn't mean, to them, it's the public confession of Jesus, of you accepting Jesus.
Yeah, I know in counseling,
nothing to do with the concept that Jesus has accepted you first.
I think we're so busy that even in counseling, I've been counseled by a professional counselor, and still see somebody once in a while. But in that, I've learned sometimes we have vices we go to, so we don't have to feel or think about a deeper meaning. We just stay busy because it's easier. Oh, the next thing, let's scream louder on our topic. Let's find another, keep switching topics because we don't know how to stop, pause, and feel the Spirit. We're too uncomfortable with it because we don't do silence well.
Yeah, that's really good. I'll throw a monkey wrench in this whole thing. Okay. And here's a monkey wrench. I know somebody that goes to a church that has horrible theology. It's horrible, and there's no need for me to really get into what that is necessarily. And I'm not one to give a hint. Calvin. But anyway, no, seriously. But it has the meanest theology, but it really doesn't require anything of the members. It doesn't force it down their throat. It's almost like it's so caricatured and cartoonish, no one even really believes it. They really don't believe it. They don't talk about it. They don't try to sell it but they congregate there. And I will say this particular church has a lot of people who walk in goodwill towards other people. And I've changed my view of it a little bit, just to this extent. Whatever we are, if we're walking with Jesus, whether it's us meeting like this or wherever it is, one real fruit of that, one real fruit of the Spirit, I think you can just summarize by saying the goodwill we have for other people. Okay, I think that's a missing thing, and I got rebuked a little bit because there would have been a day I would have judged this church for its theology rather than looking at what it's.
How could anything good come out of Bethlehem, right?
Yeah. Well, what some of these members were doing, and they were doing it secretly. I found out that some of them were doing things, and they weren't looking for it. And they're well-to-do people, okay, and they're rich. And I'm not saying, listen, you might have a theological conversation with them, and they would just start blinking and not know what on earth you were talking about. Maybe not. All right. But regardless of that, they did have a level of goodwill. And I'm just saying, I'm learning not to discount that altogether. That if that's the level where they can let Jesus flow through them, even maybe on a subconscious level, because their consciousnesses just aren't that hungry. And they may be more focused on external stuff. But you know what? The goodwill that I see many of them do is really, it's hidden goodwill, which is the best kind of all, you know? And I don't know, it's just got me rethinking. There's a lot to this. My point being that no matter where we're at, where our hunger takes us, I think we can police ourselves in a good way. You know, we can test ourselves to see if we're in the faith based on our level of goodwill toward other people. And that's something that I really am focusing on, to try to maintain goodwill. You know, that I know I've said this before, but I mean, that's what the angels announced Jesus is coming with: peace on earth, goodwill towards all, you know. And I think we have a lot of Christianity, even within maybe the invisible Christianity, that lacks goodwill. I think, you know, this progressive, we're talking about the coming out progressive kind of thinking, and a lot of it just doesn't have goodwill. And to me, I don't know, my heart hungers that the bride of Christ would rise up and we would have more goodwill in us, and that people would know us by our goodwill towards each other.
Not for what we hate.
Exactly.
I think the wrench you just threw in is a beautiful picture of grace, because while some have deconstructed to the point of they think church is awful, shouldn't have institutional churches, the bad swear word, but there are saints in those places that are either blind and are still good people. They might have a bad
They have goodwill, and just like Richard said, there's some people, some of the most
correct,
generous people I've ever met are still in the church.
So if deconstruction is making you hate people anywhere, because usually your first reaction is going to be, that's the institutional church I'm running away from, so I really can't stand them, I can't stomach them, and all this negative hostility, that's not Jesus. That's immaturity. Shut up until you process your stuff, and don't process your pain online. I see it happen all the time. It's like, wow, I'm seeing how stupid this looks. You know, do it quietly with good people to process this with and find healing. Because if we're going to bleed on everybody that didn't cut us, we're going to make a mess.
Hey, I'm sure Bill probably knows this fella. There's no need for me to mention his name, but he renounced Christianity. He was selling Christian books one day. He renounced Christianity one day, and I mean violently renounced it. Didn't take any time off, didn't pull off the side of the road for a while and kind of decompress and catch himself. He immediately started advocating against Jesus. All right. And then he started writing books against Jesus. So then he developed another website where he was selling books. He kept his old Christian books on there, but took his name off of the website, but maintained the website. Then started a new website with books against Christianity. And I mean, I'll be honest with him. I sent him a message one time. I said, "What's next?" You know, I mean, you're selling books against Christ, selling books for Christ. I mean, why did, you know, I just was trying to reach him, and I probably didn't have the best spirit when I was doing it, to be honest with you. But I just didn't feel like, it's what you just said. He had to believe whatever he thought in the day, like he thought that was he was at the end of the road, and he preached it, and he bled, like you said. And I truly wonder about people, and we were discussing somebody earlier who within the space of a couple of months has done the same thing. Somebody that, you know, Bill and I both love, and but yet he's become so virulently anti-Jesus and anti-divine that with no pause. You know, you would think if your whole mindset was just totally decimated and changed, and you left it behind, that you need some time to build up the new mindset.
Paul had to go study for a couple of years. Did he not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 9. I think it wasn't 9 years. I think it was 9 years.
Really?
He went away. Yeah.
I was 3, but that's okay.
Well, it may have been 3. Yeah.
3's a lot.
Yeah.
Because I just
These
learned this
days-
yesterday. I'm going to tell everybody.
Yeah. Today we pushed him out and make him lead a ministry right away.
That's true. Yeah.
That
Well,
so maybe it's that illusion that is creating a problem, right? We've set up people to think that in order to have value or a voice, you have to be a Christian leader, teacher, ministry leader. So now everybody's trying to build their platform.
yeah.
But I'm finding, unfortunately, I didn't realize I could have looked like this at some point, that self-promotion is an awful thing. It's like, oh no, is that what it looked like?
I know.
I know. Me too.
I did over the last probably 2 years. I think all three of us have, because I know you both pretty well, kind of done the same thing. Kind of done one of those like we're kind of going to pull back a little bit. I know I haven't, and kind of
Well, this program, I call it Still Growing in Grace because of that. Because back then that I realized, hang on, I don't have the grace message. I have a message that is growing, and none of us have arrived. And so to have people speak from a place of arrival and dogmatic, mixing in their cultural crap and politics and whatever hobby horse they're riding, it's hard.
And one of the other aspects of this, and this is just, I think it's good to articulate this, because more than likely someone else besides the three of us is watching and observed the same thing, and maybe they have a confusion about it, or they don't have words to it. But so many of the people who have claimed to arrive in any way, shape, or form, many of whom, as we discussed last week, are now in a place of quote unquote spirituality that no longer needs Jesus, no longer needs this.
I think that's overriding the base. I just think it is.
But
Yeah.
The interesting thing about them is, I think there's one of the words that came to me this week was revisionism or revisionist, that they're being unwilling to be honest with their own journey of faith, and the imperative and foundational component to a very massive paradigm shift that was completely guided by the story and person of Jesus. We all know them. We watched their journey. We participated with many of their journeys. And Jesus was at the core of why they left the foundational, institutional, hyper-religious, using Jesus in the wrong way sense, church, through the Jesus story. Jesus was the one that inspired them to see these things from only Jesus, only the cross, only the message of grace was what pulled them out of that. And then they kind of like just have dropped it like a rock. Like that never happened. And I just still gotten to where I am today without the Jesus message, which is bullshit. Right? It is. And so I think that's the one thing for me. It was Jesus that has taken me out of some of the misinterpretations that I was raised within. And I can't imagine setting that aside, because without that I'm not being truthful with my own story. I'm not being truthful with the shepherd that guided me through that wilderness, so to speak.
So maybe your story needs to be shared more often. Maybe our stories,
But with honesty.
That's what I mean, honestly.
All the pieces of our story. We can't leave out massive gaps.
Yep, the dark. I heard Paul Young in a video today tell a lady asked a question about how then do we bring this message. He said, tell your story, but the whole story. The bad, the good, the dark, the light, transparency and honesty. Transparency breeds transparency and authenticity. And I think maybe that's the word I'm after now, that the authenticity of faith has, it's being revealed that there isn't one, it's a system. And so when we hear authentic faith, we're drawn to it.
Yes.
And don't overrun the base. Take time, slow down. There is no rush to grow. I just told a young man that about an hour ago. Said, don't hurry up to be good at what you do. You're not trying to press anyone. Slow down. Less is more. Like, look who's talking here. Holy smokes.
You're right. And I think that's the one thing that, not to parallel it too hard, but the scriptures that we have that have become this idol into a certain aspect and are being thrown out by another group. That's the beauty of the scriptures, is their authenticity. Mm-hmm. Like we have a story of, and we talked about Ananias and Sapphira just the other day, that is a painfully transparent account of the early church, you know, right there smack dab in the middle of it. And the authenticity of those scriptures is what makes that story so powerful still to this day, that it's not
Cleaned up.
you know, unicorns and rainbows, the whole thing, right? Jesus himself left to a large degree, stopped preaching in the institutional church of his day. He stopped preaching in the synagogues because they couldn't take the message he had. And I think the three of us have that same struggle in some regard in our own little worlds, right? Paul, same thing. He tried to take it to the synagogues. They didn't really want to hear it, so he had to take it out to the people who would listen. And so it's amazing the parallels that happen even in scripture that we can take with us today that still provide at least comfort, peace, wisdom, some guidance. We don't have to hyper literalize them, but we can also recognize the patterns and where they lead us, which is ultimately Christ.
Well, and it has flaws. It's so authentic that it has authentic human flaws in it.
Absolutely.
But they're recognizable flaws.
Yep.
And they're flaws that Jesus teaches us. He warns us about and tells us, you know, and Paul as well, they warn us to listen. You're going to have people try to take you to the dead letter. You know, don't go there. You know,
Yep.
don't and stay in the living spirit. And, you know, the Old Testament was written as examples for you not to follow. You know, but I will say this. I will say this, that that it's interesting to me that there's a, I don't know if y'all remember when, and this just came to me when Bill was talking a second ago, but you know, when Moses went up on the mountain, he was gone for such a long period of time and everyone got impatient down at the bottom. And then Aaron, they kind of force Aaron to make a, make an idol, but they don't really force him. They just tell him, you know, Moses is gone, that man of God, you know, and Mike, what you were saying earlier about being in a hurry, you know, they were in a hurry. So basically, Moses, I mean, Aaron puts this gold in the fire and it comes out with Baal. All right. And he says, well, and he explains it to Moses later and says, well, it just kind of formed itself. Well, yeah, baloney, you know, baloney. You know, they wanted a God they could see and not have to worry about. But see, that wasn't so we could criticize Jewish people because they're blessed. All right. But that's for us to see that in our own lives, we've wanted a God we can see. We want a Baal. You know, we want a Baal or a church Baal. You know, a God we can see, touch, taste, a building. We want to equate God with a building, which if we were honest, I know I'm being honest, I'll be transparent. I used to equate God with a building, you know, with these buildings and with the high structures and all. But because it was something I could see, because my faith wasn't in an intimate enough place with the Lord that I could just be with the Lord without ever having to darken a building again. And not to say that a building is evil, but it is evil if it is evil to you, or at least it's an obstruction to you if you think that's God and you can't differentiate the two. So and that whoever takes the podium speaks for God.
Yeah.
I mean, the best we can do is speak with God. That's the very best we can do.
Well, didn't Moses say, "You have how long must God and I put up with you?"
Yes.
That arrogant thing that, like, I like what you just said, that the church building isn't evil in and of itself, because there's still beautiful art in there. There is inspiration that's got into buildings. We can learn much from it, but our attitude towards the systems and what we were raised in, we judge all these places. Well, maybe you can judge it for what it originated as. Maybe there was a good intent and maybe there's bad blood on it. Fine. But that's not the topic that we're supposed to be investing our lives in. People are the topic.
Right.
And
we're always looking in our flesh. I think this is right. We're always looking for something to mediate God to us, you know, and we don't think we're good enough. We don't think we can hear God enough. We don't think we're wholehearted enough. So we look for mediators
and raise up others that we think are good.
Yes.
Raise up people and get their heads stuffed full. That's not fair either.
Exactly. But it distances us. You know, I read once about goldfish or fish, schools of fish, that they swim together as a defense mechanism, so that they hide. They're able to hide from the enemy because there's so many of them together and they're floating together and they're able to hide. And it hit me one day, man. I was shocked. I was looking at a church full of people and I was saying, God, could we be hiding? Could we actually be hiding from God? You know, using that same principle that we swim in a school so that we can hide. You know, and I'm sure that's not true in many cases, but I'm sure it's probably true in a lot of cases.
So the fig leaves are brand names now.
Yeah. But you know what? There's no condemnation over any of this. It's just recognizing the things, anything, there is no, Jesus is our mediator. He is our only mediator. And I think that's why what are we? A nation of priests, right? We're a nation of priests, the priesthood of the believer. That's the very foundational thing of our modern Christianity is priesthood of the believer. And yet we still want other priests to come in and re-priest us.
You just confirmed my chaplaincy idea, because it's the same thing. We're all priests. We're all ministers. I'm just using the word chaplain because it clicks with me, but maybe that's what the church is. And it is. We're all ministers. I'm not supposed to do all the work.
We're all ministers of reconciliation, right?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Not ministers of condemnation and shame and guilt.
Yeah.
So, man.
Well, I think this slightly fits here. It's terminology can be such a box, right? Language is just incomplete always. So, putting labels on things is tough, but using the dialogue that we all understand is easy here. But that's one of my personal definitions for disciple. I mean, I think both of you've heard this, but I think it's a good place for it. When you look at the progression of Jesus and he picks these guys, he gets a tax collector and some fishermen, and he slaps these guys together, and he goes and gets Peter, and he's got these guys, they're his disciples, they're his followers, right? They're in a very, if we're being honest, immature state of belief. These are all Jewish people following the Jewish law. It's my opinion they were eschatologists. These were guys focused on the inevitability of the Messiah, right? They were looking for the Messiah. Jesus comes along, and he's this prophet. He's done some stuff, and he's probably heard his name or a rumor about him, and he asks them to follow him, and they're like, dude, we get aligned with the right guy, we're taking over. And we're the inside circle, right? We're the inside circle to the guy who's going to go up on that temple, and he's going to kick ass, take names, he's going to boot Rome, he's going to kick out Herod, and boom, we're in charge. That's who these guys were. That's what they were all about. And if we don't read the scriptures, the gospel accounts with that filter about how Jesus communicated with them, we're missing one thing. But what they really were, they were confused. They were all in. They were all about this Jesus guy, but they were painfully confused.
Sounds like deconstruction.
Yes.
All the way up in and through his death, burial, and resurrection, and ascension. Even then, they're still going, what? And discipleship, it's so funny because we're making disciples of all men, right? Just what Jesus said, all people. It's okay to be confused. And it's what it taught me for a lot of years. Like, there's a season for confusion where it's okay. But these men grew out of it, right? Paul took, like we said, years for the scales to fall off his eyes. Took days, but it still took him years to kind of process what he experienced from his transition to Saul to Paul, right? And so we don't have to be in a hurry, just like you said, but there is growth.
Yeah.
There is growth. There is a path. These people stop being called disciples.
That soother's got to come out of your mouth sometime.
Right. And they became apostles, not to make that a label, not to make that a word, but they became ministers of reconciliation, right? And they became healers. They became miracle workers. They became something that they never believed they could be, not by their own means, but by allowing the active spirit of Christ, Holy Spirit inside of them to grow them in this knowledge of grace and truth that Jesus personified.
When you were talking, I was thinking about, how when he's talking about Jesus is talking about those who are born again, they're like the wind. You don't know where they're coming from and where they're going to. I was thinking those who are born of the institution, you know exactly where they're coming from and where they're going to, because it's all set out. So really, what we learn through the wilderness is we learn to not have the pre-plan. So that really, I believe that Paul's big thing, and he continued to work it, even as an apostle, he continued to work past it, was his ideas of controlling. He tells the 1 Corinthian letters, to do one thing with this guy that's caught in sin. Then he tells him in the second letter, take him back and forgive him. I kind of spoke harshly. You never know where the next place the Lord is going to take you. And you remember when we said last time, we talked about getting Moses, Moses got the Israelites out of Egypt, but then the wilderness was about getting Egypt out of the Israelites.
That was good.
And deconstruction is wilderness. It's to get the systems, because if we don't, then we'll languish and just have more institutionalized progressive stuff going on, which is the last thing we want. We want to move on to the third stage, which is the promised land, where we rest because we don't know. We've crucified our expectations, other than a belief in a good God, and other than the belief that we know his nature, and his nature will lead us.
And we become responsive. We become responsive.
Yes.
So this reminds me of First John, where he writes, I speak to you children because you know who your father is. I speak to you young men because you've overcome the evil one. And I speak to you who know him who's been from the beginning, however it's worded. Child, young man, or young person, adult. The child says, who am I in Christ? It's all about me, meism. And then the next stage is more of okay, I am in Christ. Holy smokes, that's a huge, big deal. And the father level is us. We see Christ in all one. We see union.
No longer regard anyone according to the flesh.
Yep.
Yes.
So this journey of growing, if it doesn't make you look more like union, then you're not done. You have much more to go. And so I think there's room for teenage stages of hormones and spiritual growth. You get all those ups and downs. And
it has nothing to do with our physical age.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
That's
or how much knowledge you have. I have seen, and I am seeing more and more, the more loving and quiet a person is in their approach to people that are difficult, that to me is a greater sign of maturity than constantly feeling they need to be the corrector, which is the system of control.
Agreed. And I want to share something, because I'm hearing new stuff today, just as we're talking. This is all revving up off each other. But this idea of pixelation, we've talked about it before, but I've got this picture of Jesus on my iPad, but he's pixelated. You can still tell it's him, or at least our image of him,
Yep.
But you can't really see the fine details on it. But wouldn't it be something if our spiritual walk was more about getting everything pixelated, so that we don't walk by sight? See, what the church visible will want to do is make everything exactly visible, orderly. Everything is clear, structured.
No more thinking. No more
systematized.
Tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah.
Yes. But what if going through the wilderness? What if what we're supposed to be doing is seeing nothing is as it appears? My spiritual dad, Dewey Hammond was his name, but he's the one that led me into the deeper things of the spirit. The last thing he said to me, he was unconscious, and he woke up and he said, well, actually didn't say it to me. He said it to the person standing next to me, but he said, Miriam, things are not as they appear. And that was his last words. Man, those are great last words. I hope I get last words like that. But things are not as they appear. So I always take that with me. But I think that we maybe our challenge is that we try to pixelate instead of trying to clarify something. We instead recognize that it's in a pixelated state. We can make out general rough edges of what's going on, but that's the best we can do. And we need to be satisfied with that. Oh, it's pixelated. I can't make any conclusions. I'm not judging anything before it's time, but I tell you what I will do. I'll look my best to see what I hear my best, and whatever outline I can see, whatever pixelated, limited understanding I have, I'm going to pray with my whole heart.
The church has instilled such a fear of moral relativism. They really have. That was one of those things like, whoa, and yet when you step back, everything is pixelated. There is no concrete stuff to any situation. If you dig back far enough, there's a brokenness, there's a path, there's a dis-ease, there's something going on inside of every human being in every situation that roots back to something that has cause and effect associated with it. And the good news, the hope is that when we look at that pixelated Christ, one of the things I was telling Christine the other day is I'm a big picture thinker. I just am. I see things big. If we can pull our consciousness back, if we can pull our view to Christ back far enough, that pixelated image turns into a clearer image, but a wider set image.
Yes.
Further back we get, the more we can see the whole story, which is back to your authenticity, right? We can see a bigger picture, and we can go like, Hitler was a terrible human being, and his father was an awful, unloving, legalistic father, and he went through hell to become the man he was. And when he was born, from whoever his mother was, whatever situation that was, he was a beautifully innocent child and toddler who was absolutely loved and innocent and joyful and creative and all the wonderful things that every other 4-year-old is, right?
Yes.
We pull back. Now the pixelated image of Hitler comes this story that ends in sadness and tragedy, but it's much bigger and harder to judge with anything except compassion and grace.
Yes, and I tell you, I've got a Facebook friend who used to be a model, and I posted something one time. She sent me this story about how when she was a model, that for a famous artist, that the artist would squint when he would draw her, and she asked me afterwards, "Why were you squinting?" And he said, "Because the less I see, the more my gift can kick in and create what I'm not seeing clearly." And I thought, man, that is such an incredible concept. That's exactly what we're talking about here. You know, we walk not by sight, but by faith. You know, the word idolatry means serving that which is seen by the eye. You know, that's what the word literally means. Eidos is eye. So when Paul said we walk by faith, he said we don't walk by sight, we don't walk by eidos, but we walk by faith. So if idolatria, which is idolatry, means serving that which is seen, it's mean we're walking by our natural vision and our natural understanding instead of supernatural vision and supernatural understanding, which comes from the Spirit.
That's right.
How would you guys respond to individuals who are questioning their past or wanting to grow deeper, confused by loud deconstructionists, but still see there's value in the journey? How would you counsel somebody walking down this road? We got just a couple of minutes left, but what would you say to somebody who's honestly trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I process this? What would your response be? I'll jump in, then we'll give you time to think. I want to go back to the child, young man, father thing. This is about growing up.
It is.
It's not about a revival, it's not about revival. It's not about our rival, but it's about presence. And the more mature we become, pursue presence rather than right doctrine. Right doctrine comes from the wrong tree, being more right. So that's where my initial thing is. Enjoy the journey. Jesus is in charge of your journey, no matter what or who you bump into. You're going to learn from it, but don't stop.
Well, I think there's a paradox here. So which is, again, paradoxes are irrational, right? They're not something we can fully talk about. They're not something we can wrap our brain around. They're just too hard, but we can also, it's the faith seen and unseen, right? Paradox is a faith unseen. And in our growth of maturity, this is something I believe. And in a completely parallel sense, we become more and more immature. And Jesus articulated that, right? He said, become like the little children, right? He said, become like these little children, and ye shall inherit the kingdom of God, right? There's an inherent immaturity that comes with our spiritual maturation. And that's all I'll offer is, I think when you see people who are lighthearted in the most difficult of situations, people who have hope that doesn't make sense, those are the people that you may want to draw near toward, because somewhere deep down, whether they get it between the ears or not, I mean, I'm gonna say this, I know special needs people. I have a special needs nephew who doesn't have the ability to process and articulate and contemplate some of the things that we would talk about. But there's a simplicity in his hope, and there's a simplicity in his faith, and there's a simplicity in his understanding of others and his love.
That's more mature than yours.
That is, I need that, right? And I need to let go of my certainties and just rest in the simplicity of what he has.
And see, that child is full of goodwill. I had the same experience. They overflow with goodwill.
Absolutely.
That we have to struggle for to get to. The only thing that I would say is cling on to the nature of Jesus. Let the nature of Jesus always be your deconstructive guide. If it's anything that's not, and goodwill is a good way to describe his nature. He's got nothing but goodwill towards us. Restorative will, curative will, redemptive will, rescuing will, healing will, all this, that's his will. That's his nature. It's not his choices he's made. That's his nature. That's the way he is. And so just to cling on to that. And I think it's, what is it? Philippians 4:7, is that the one, or 4:15, whichever the one that says, whatever things are pure, virtuous, think on these things
4:10.
of good report, praiseworthy. Think of these things. I really think a lot of it is wherever you are, you must think on good things. Always think of good things, even in the midst of turmoil and even in the midst of disaster. Think on good things, because that's what keeps us protected and in his cocoon. And I'm not saying that we won't experience pain or loss and that sort of thing, or make horrible mistakes and all that. But I will say, when we think on his nature, we're thinking on him, and that is renewing our mind to face the circumstances that we're facing with goodwill, even if it's goodwill that's rejected and spit on. At least we're walking in the goodwill of God. So that'd be my advice.
Yeah, because I heard you both say something about certainty is a major stumbling block. And so mystery being explored and more warmly embraced might be a good gift. I think this deconstruction that people are going through, that I am going through and will be going through, it's just called discipleship. But really what's being undone is what wasn't really true anyway. So we should not be afraid of it at all.
Yeah, I think that's the beautiful thing. Again, paradox, right? There is mystery, and that mystery, we need to embrace it. But the one thing we can be certain of, the one tangible piece we can behold, right, is Jesus.
Just Jesus.
Right, and so it's both. There's mystery, but there is a certainty. I'm okay with it, one certain thing, and for me, God looks exactly like Jesus.
Yeah, I think it's a focused certainty. And I know we've been talking pixelation, which means not focused, but there's paradox, Bill. But it is focused. I'm more certain about Jesus than I ever have been. I'm less certain about most everything else.
Exactly.
That's what I mean. Like when I'm talking about rethink the certainty that keeps us from actually having faith. Because if we have certainty, we don't require faith.
Exactly. Yeah. Amen.
So, anyway, that's been fun. All right. Well, this was fun, and I'm looking forward to listening to this again when we go live, when I air this, because I listened live while this is playing and I learned from it, because I'm engaged with the conversation, but to hear it later, it's a whole new thing. I love this. I can hardly wait.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
I love it too. I love being with you guys.
Love it
too.
Yep.
All right, we're turning this off now. Thanks.
Wow, I hope you enjoyed that. That was an awesome conversation. And it's an ongoing one. This particular concept of deconstruction, unlearning, I've been using the term unlearning for many, many years, and I think unlearning is far more painful because it requires us to be more humble and admit we're wrong or we don't know it all. That's kind of hard to do for some folks. Depends on the topic too. So sometimes we have such assurance of our personal knowledge that that assurance kind of railroads or bulldozes over other people's opinions and opinions that we could learn from. I want to share with you a quote that was shared with me on Sunday. I was talking a little bit about this in my church message. By the way, if you want to dig back into some really, I think, the most foundational teachings on the centrality of Christ, I'm hoping, I think I'm doing it right now on Sunday mornings. I have a series started called The One, the Word, and the Revealer, speaking of who is Jesus really. And so we're getting to like 1 John, we're getting into Colossians, and just kind of, let's get back down to the basics. And so, hey, Jermaine, good to see you there, buddy. But this quote I want to share with you, when it was shared with me, I said, please text this to me, Drew. And so this is what he came up with. And I thought this is really, really helpful. Deconstruction is a gentle, careful teardown with the purpose of reusing the material. Demolition is the destruction without repurpose. Ooh, I love that. To me, that's I think that's another layer of understanding what deconstruction is, because there's a number of definitions out there. There isn't a singular definition. It's like this forgiveness conference that's coming up in January. You'll hear more about it soon. But there are multiple definitions and views or ways to see or understand what forgiveness is. And so having the understanding from others is really, really helpful. But deconstruction. Yeah, like who's in charge of that? Not us. Then we were talking about the gospel today just a little bit. What is it? And I've shared this quote many times. So let me share this with you. This is from a song, but the song by Ryan Stevenson called "The Gospel." He's actually getting a quote from Baxter Kruger, and he asked permission to use this in one of his songs. It says, "The amazing news of the gospel is not that we can receive Jesus into our lives, but that he's already received us into his." Oh my, I love that. To me, that is a message of hope. If you hear that song, really good song, and then partway through he says the quote, not singing it. And it's to me, that's the power of that song. If there's, if there's something else you don't like in the other part, so what? There's a way to grow and learn and realize that we have not got it all figured out. Anyway, I hope today's conversation was encouraging. Let me jump in and say hello to some folks. Howard from Sorrento, BC. Good morning. Great seeing you chiming in. Anna, I'm glad for all your comments. I'm not going to be able to read them all because you had too many. Haha, I love it. But it's fun. I do that too. I love chatting along with the conversation, but because the conversation was pre-recorded, they couldn't see the comments. I'm seeing them as I'm going through, and they're great, worth looking at. Let me hit down to... Yeah, Linda. Hey, good morning, Linda. Hey, I sent you, I replied to your PM. It kind of got deleted, so I sent you another one just now or this morning. Sandy, good morning. Thrilled to have you join in from the UK. Amazing. And Anna, I don't know where you live, Anna, but maybe you'll tell us where that is. All right, got to sign off. I got lots going on. Next week, I think we're going to have a conversation with Catherine Toon. She interviewed me for one of her blogs, podcasts, and it was video recorded. So I'm going to share that with Still Growing in Grace. And it's the topic of grief in COVID and kind of what's happened in just a conversation about loss, grief, how to handle it, and how COVID has affected our decision-making in that. So I hope you'll appreciate that next week. That's it. You guys have a really, really great week. And if you like this, share it. And if you didn't see part 1, it's in the links below. And then I'll update the YouTube link for those on Facebook. I'm going to update the link because I'm going to re-upload this with the edited version with the countdown removed. That's it. Have a wonderful day. Catch you next time. Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace for more good news. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. You can also visit hopefellowshipycc.com to find our service times and location. If this show has been an encouragement to you, please consider making a donation today at growingingrace.ca and help us keep spreading this good news. Thank you again for tuning in to Still Growing in Grace.